Greetings to George, this is Aridif, A-R-I-D-I-F, and this is its spell. We understand you have many queries for the collective in mind this day, but before diving into those queries, the two things in which we have always expressed, first, above and beyond all things expressed within this day, to know, feel, and perceive that you are loved is of the utmost importance. And secondly, it is our greatest excitement to be here in this moment through your linear time in co-creation. You may begin your queries at your leisure.
Well, Aridif, I want to take this opportunity as well, and since our session today is going to be a public one, I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of many people also here on Earth. We would like to express our gratitude both to you and Treb for visiting us and sharing your valuable wisdom with us, and we love you very much.
Yes, of course. As you are aware, you are loved, but we also love you. And as you are co-creating with us, we are also exploring the parts of our own consciousness that we have yet to explore. This means as you grow, we grow also. We thank you for this and we congratulate you for this.
Very good. Aridif, in one of my interactions with another ET being, I was informed that about 17,300 years ago, I had a past life in India, in a time where there were great wars among many races, when humans fought along with ETs, which back then they were considered as gods. He continued to say that while being a soldier in an army during that time, I had met with over 7 different races. He said that I fought strongly against the enemies, and after the end of those events, I felt compelled to know what was in the ships above me and what was in the planets of the gods who shared their dedication with us. So, Aridif, can you please shed some light on this unknown part of our planetary history that took place 17,300 years ago, using my past life as a reference? Can you please start by telling me my name or what they used to call me, and then a little bit about my upbringing, including the general level of evolution of mankind at that time?
Yes, of course. As you are looking at that specific incarnation, you were within the area that is now called India, and this is not necessarily an unknown part of the human history. In fact, a great deal of manuscripts were written in the conjunction with other oral representations of the history that concern what was called the Indian, human, and extraterrestrial war. All of those energies in the co-creation were not truly only at the 17,000.3 year marker. In fact, from the year 31,000 in before 17,000 years in your linear history, those wars were continued and fought throughout many different countries. As you perceive, your Earth Collective and your specific incarnation, that was one part of the overall ideal behind this conflict that occurred. When you look at your overall history, you understand your genetics have been manipulated. Your energy of DNA has been added and subtracted with other races. In this portion, many races were coming into the human collective in order to co-create a betterment of the energy of humans. They perceived that the reptilian DNA that was given to you was not good. They perceived the Anunnaki DNA that was given to you was not good. The Elohim tried to circumvent this originally. And as they gave their own DNA to co-create an energy, other races started coming in as well, including the Syrian beings, including what you would perceive as the ancient Andromedans, including Pleaidians, Syrians, etc. All of these races given their own DNA to try to circumvent the jumping of consciousness and evolution that was happening to humans, that in their perspective was forced upon human beings. Now, many of these races were what you would consider type 2 races, even though some were highly benevolent. They did their own actions towards human beings with additional DNA in order to replicate or to circumvent that negative perspective of energy. And in doing so, it only caused further co-creation of confusion and disassociation of humanity with their own physical bodies and with the planet they inhabited. It continued for some time afterwards. Now, if you look back at the Anunnaki energy, this is going back approximately 2.4 billion, or let us say, one moment, we must change that number. It is 2.4 million years ago in your history. And after that energy was co-created, the continuation of changes occurred until approximately 33,000 years ago. That war started, and that war started from one race. Many of you know the god as Krishna came into the co-created collective, and many entities that were with Krishna were not in fact his own race, but adopted from the stars, adopted from other planetary consciousnesses. Krishna was inhabiting the earth consciousness, but was a star seed. His family recognized that energy. They came in for that co-creation, and with meeting with Krishna and Krishna's own mindset and perspective on what was occurring within his own collective consciousness, they started to aid him by giving him technology, by giving him a great deal of many upgrades of the DNA and within his own mindset. Even though he was already at the precipice of fourth density and inhabiting that third density body, he was still upgraded to the high fourth density. Now this created a great stir in the collective consciousness. Many entities started worshipping this being as a god. Other extraterrestrials had already been inhabiting Earth in order to feed from the negative energy of humans. Because of the DNA being mixed up and all of the humans starting to be disassociated with themselves and their planet, this created that negative energy that most type 2 malevolent beings tend to feed from. That energy was stopping the source of feeding, with Krishna teaching all of the humans, all of this energy, how they could free themselves if they desired. After these beings that were type 2 malevolent attacked the being called Krishna, the war started. This continued for several thousand years, and although Krishna did not inhabit the same body for more than 980 years, he did have children and offspring, and those beings naturally were called Krishna. Because of their appearance, because of their own perspective and looks, those beings were given their father's name. After several generations of this energy, many of the beings that were type 1 spoke to these type 2 beings, both benevolent and malevolent, and expressed their own desire to create a quarantine for all beings inhabiting Earth. Most of the benevolent beings agreed. Most of them stepped away and only energetically connected to those who were psychic enough to receive them, while those that were type 2 agreed on the surface of mass connection, or connecting to those in the public sense, but still continued to work with those that were, in your perspective, power of many nations. Those beings continued their psychic work and continued their feeding processes from the earth, while those that were benevolent continued to assist in their own way. That war was creation in the earth collective consciousness, and our perspective from the manifestation of the imbalance in the earth from human beings at that time. Just as you have created war within your own means each day, while one nation or one religion is so different from another and not being able to communicate their differences, fighting seems to be the most natural setting for humans with great differences in that way. So just as in that case, the energy of the co-creation continues forward with those that are negative beings and those that are feeding from the human collective. Now, when you look at all of the energies from that war in your specific lifetime, this energy is not known by the name. You were one out of multiple possible incarnations within that lifetime. There are 3 different lifetimes in where you were interacting with that energy, approximately 17,000 years in your previous energy. What we believe the being saw was the most probable lifetime, and that is where you engaged with the 3rd generation of the Krishna family. And in that energy, all of you were given technology. All of you were given enhancements in your DNA. And that allowed you to be able to utilize technology in order to fight the physical manifestation of war. That energy allowed your own self to start wandering. And because of your enhancement, it gave you an opportunity to tap in to certain psychic energies that allowed you telepathic communication, even after being away from the physical war for many years.
Okay. So what was the general level of evolution of mankind at that time?
Yes, if you look at the entire collective consciousness, the part of evolution was in certain ways and spiritual essence more so than your now collective. But mentally and logically, it was much different. The thought processes were not the same. Entities were still utilizing the energy of the old pagan version of ways, where they were calling upon gods to utilize manifestations, where they were utilizing both mantras and certain ceremonial rites that would co-create quicker manifestations. But the imbalanced level also created larger forms of anger. Although you believe that your Earth Collective is deeply in trouble in this moment, although most humans believe that the wars that occur are large and very scary and that your Earth Collective is getting worse at hand, in fact, in that time period, the human energy was able to go into an extreme rage much more quickly than most humans are able to in this moment. And by triggering those differences from one specific tribe to another, it created even more disharmony. So in that way, there were parts of you more evolved and parts of you much less evolved than this time. Those that were truly evolved in that time period were those who co-created with the ETs and created upgrades within their own DNA. Once their generations died outward, for the majority's sake, that energy started going to the wayside. In that energy, there are descendants that are left physically, biologically, genetically, that were related to those beings, and those are the entities that you would perceive with natural psychic abilities as they are born. This is where you are creating those who find their energies of psychic power in their teens and 20s without being deeply connected to their soul and to their heart.
Okay. What about with regards to language? Was their language well developed? Did they have like a rich dictionary of words?
Yes, there was not as much of the written language as there was verbal. Again, their mindset was completely different. They did not feel the need to have written all of the energy down. That started changing approximately midway in this war set. There were beings who started learning written languages from extraterrestrial beings. There were a few tribes before the war started that had written, taught indirectly by either Anunnaki or the Elohim. But the language energy was already well dispersed before these wars started. Originally, there was 1 or 2 languages that started within the beginning of the now version of human after the Anunnaki upgrade, after the Elohim upgrade. But approximately halfway through the Elohim's time upon the Earth Collective, the languages begin to split in multiple. This is what your biblical terms, the Tower of Babel, represents. The splitting of the oral representation of language and the beginning portion of certain tribes gaining access to the written. In the wartime, many of the tribes and races that were not attuned to the written format started tuning themselves forward to create higher forms of written language and also sharpening their verbal language skills as well.
Can you tell me a little bit about my childhood and teenhood?
Yes, are you speaking of that specific incarnation or this specific incarnation?
No, that one, of course. 17,300 years ago.
Yes, now, growing up in that time, there was already the war, so gods were among you. Gods were walking around. You grew up quickly understanding. The area and where you were was specifically dedicated to those that were the Krishna version, the armies. Now, when you look at your Hindu history, you will see that multiple regions worshipped multiple gods, and it was not because they desired to connect to those gods. It was because they lived in a region where those specific extraterrestrial beings inhabited and held posts of power. So your specific region was the Krishna region. That energy allowed you access to those that were Krishna-related and the extraterrestrials that were co-creating, perhaps as you would see, partnerships with. So in that area, you saw these gods walking amongst your streets. You saw them flying over your cities. You grew up as a young child. You did not have a great deal of financial well-being or means, but the system of finances that had come before this had all but been demolished. So each human was upon an equal level, but most beings in that area did not have a great deal of physical things. But that was not what drove humans in that time. What drove humans was taking their own God's word, taking their God's teaching, and giving it out to a greater part of the collective. So in that area, all you desired was for others to understand, to worship, and to connect to Krishna, as you did and as all of your families in your linear past had. That verbal history that was handed down. One of your great, etc. grandfathers had met the original iteration of Krishna. So this was a rich family history for you, and that was all that you desired. Going into your teenagehood, you were considered a man at approximately 12 years of age. At that time, you were able to go into the co-creation of the actual ships and start talking to those that were soldiers, if you will, of the Krishna army, both human and extraterrestrial. In this time, you gained great access to the upgrades that were given to you. This gave you the ability to start learning warfare and the spreading of that word. Those were both specifically endowed to you as a child from your own family, but the warring and warfaring was something new to you. You explored that energy and you co-created a great deal of all of your friendships from childhood friends that had grown up, and enlisted a great deal of those who were on the cusp of manhood in that way. By co-creating and joining that energy, you helped raise the number of those that were willing to fight exponentially. And the regent, or the being who was in charge of that specific area, took notice of you and started talking and co-creating and spending more time with you. In that way, you started going into those battles where other extraterrestrials were coming into that area that was considered Krishna's land. When those entities came into that region trying to talk to humans, trying to spread their own version of help, you were there to fight back all of the humans or extraterrestrials that impeded upon your land. That was the average life throughout your teenagerhood and into your adulthood.
Okay, let's start naming who was on each side. Tell me the names of the races that were on each side, and some of the major events that took place when I was a soldier.
Yes, of course. Now, there are many entities that were involved. Most of these can be found within your Hindu texts. But most frequently, the name of these beings were not the same names of the races in which they came from. For instance, the being that is known as Kali. Most humans believe this to be one of two things, either a true god or a representation of an energy that is transmutative, an energy that appeals to the change, no matter what means that change comes. But, in fact, this being that was a feminine entity called Kali was, in fact, an extra-dimensional and extraterrestrial being, although in higher density, manifesting a physical body in order to co-create. This being was the warrior archetype of construct. This was one energy that butted up against some of the outskirts of the fighting region in your specific lifetime. There were also many other beings that were related to either Kali or Krishna that were in that area, and all of those that you perceived were not what they were called within that area. We go back to the Kali example. Although Kali is perceived as a goddess, one of the greatest goddesses, this entity was in fact far beyond the area that you call the Orion constellation, approximately 3/4 to the end of the galaxy in that way. If you were to look at the Orion sky and go approximately 3/4 to the edge of your known galaxy, that is where her race existed from. Although you would call her Kali, the entire race was known as Kunak, and that energy, although different, related to the sound vibration that came inward. Also, you look at other entities that were involved, such as those that had the multiple arms. Now, the multiple arms was symbolism for the majority of those entities. These beings inhabited bodies with 2 arms. There were only one race involved with multiple arms, and those were entities that exist in your Leo constellation. The race to us are known by their name of choosing, which is Aridif, and those entities were creating within that specific war as well. Those that were perceived as multiple arm entities were only known by this because of their fast movements of their physical body. Those entities you also had engaged multiple times. When a human being would look at their arms as they were moving through their technology, they would move so quickly it would appear that multiple arms were in multiple places, but in fact it was only 2 arms moving quickly. So all of these energies and varieties you had seen with your own eyes in that incarnation.
Okay. Do you want to share some of their fighting tactics that each side used?
Yes, of course. Now, some of you perceive the idea, the staff of electricity that was utilized. In fact, this was not a staff of electricity, although electricity had a great part of this energy. Most of you perceive electricity in concentrated form as a bolt of lightning. There was a specific staff that was given that would project enough energy to create large explosions with only a concentrated electricity beam, such as all lightning. This is why many humans who did not understand the technology perceived it as a beam of light or an energy that was co-created of lightning. This also back to other gods, such as your Norse and your Greek and Roman mythologies. This entity specifically would utilize a large staff, for lack of better terms, that ignited that energy. Others that saw bolts or balls of fire fall from the sky and incinerate great areas. What was occurring? Those beings were utilizing energy of projectiles that were co-created in electromagnetic energy and also the energy of what you would call plasma. Now, from your technological understanding in this moment, approximately utilization of a railgun, but instead of a metal projectile, it would be one that is created from heated plasma, encased in an even stronger electromagnetic field. This would be the approximation of this energy. Also, you would see other beings that would express the bombards going through the sky at great speeds and great deals and seeing liquid metal. There were entities who utilized mercury through their technological means, but there were also beings who would utilize what you would call compressed liquid metallic hydrogen. And this energy is something that is very common in the specific nature of technology in 4th and 5th density beings. Treb Bor Yit NE's race is one that utilizes this form of technology as well. So, by going through all of those different technological ideas, looking at what you can understand now from a technological standpoint, you can utilize the versions of technology that were available. The fighting styles were very similar to most Earth fighting styles. Because they were on Earth and working with humans, they had to utilize that same format, setting up a perimeter grid of territory, knowing that everyone in this grid supports this specific being or this specific way of thinking, and by utilizing this would protect those borders. Any time that there was an infringement upon borders, most of those beings would work through retaliative steps by pushing their own army back towards the alignment of those who tried to take their specific plot land, for lack of better terms. So this energy was fought in a united front and guerrilla warfare style of war. It was very primitive for the extra-dimensional and extraterrestrial beings, but because they were trying to work within the realm of human thought, trying to work within the realm of human understanding, and trying to create no fighting and no war, only the understanding of philosophy, then they allowed the human beings to do a great deal of that fighting.
Okay. The entity that I was interacting with also mentioned to me that the moon was the staging point for several races in the war, and was also a place of many battles and destruction. Can you please elaborate on this as well?
Yes, first of all, this is correct to a perspective. There were bases that were within the area of the moon, but there were also bases there much longer before this started, and still there are bases within that moon collective. So, yes, that energy is correct. The staging point of those areas, we would say, is not specifically. Perhaps you would see it in the correct point of perspective, but there are energies from the moon where others would meet in that area, so they were not meeting within the Earth collective. At that point, the communication of those that were off-world worked with humanity and connected to the extra-dimensionals who left. There were no humans that co-created on the moon at that time, only those extraterrestrial to extra-dimensional connections.
Okay. What was the outcome of the war, and what were the ramifications of that outcome?
Yes, first of all, the outcome of the war was similar to what we had expressed, an understanding and collaboration with both Type 1 and Type 2 benevolent and malevolent beings, that Earth was to be left alone by all beings, so that Earth could grow in the way that they desired. Now, many races did not fully adhere to this, as you understood, and many of those Type 1 or Type 2 benevolent worked with Earth but in a different way, an energetic and psychic way. In that case, in that area, the ramifications were very similar to what it would have been without, although the genetic modifications changed the version of humans that came into contact. If that war would not have occurred, the 2012 point of the complete protection of the Earth from outside contact would have continued to occur. That is, as you would say, the default setting for the majority of beings in the galactic consciousness, to allow those beings until they reach fourth density period or point of energy to grow and do as they need. But after one infringement occurred, those Type 2s believed that another infringement would help circumvent or reverse the last. So in that energy it was very similar. The ramifications in its complete nature is you are a different version of humans than what you would have been if only the Anunnaki, the Elohim, Pleaidian and Syrian beings connected to your DNA. Many of those different modifications in your DNA came from that time period after you had already been modified. So in that way, there's also a great deal of those that are Type 1 who do not contact Earth or work with co-creation of collective consciousness for that reason alone. They still see that humans have not evolved to their full potential. They see that because of the modification setting certain parts of their evolution back, that any further interfering in their own perspective would only cause a co-creation of a different outcome than what could be without them. So they try to stay backwards. Many of those that are type 2 and benevolent feel justified in coming into the Earth Collective now and becoming more hands-on with small groups of human beings or one-to-one work with human beings. So those are some different ramifications and outcomes of that entire collective war.
Yeah, but this is it sounds very unjust to us. The fact that only type 2 races come and interact with a small group of people who work from more egoistic point of view. So since the type 2 races have come to Earth and started interacting with those bad groups, shouldn't type 1 races come and interact with us, trying to balance things out?
Yes, now in that way, or in that point of view, our own race, considered type 1, still works with humanity. Those who desire to work with us, it must be in your desire before we co-create that connection. In that way, we do not work physically, because it is against the will of a great deal of others upon the Earth Collective. You are correct when you say that the majority of human beings desire to know the true nature of your evolution, the true nature of your place upon Earth, but a great deal are so deeply ingrained with either religious or cultural beliefs of where their physical version of humanity came from, that they will not accept other things. This is why most of us that are type 1, even those that are willing to co-create with humans in the level that we are, cannot be on Earth, because we cannot infringe upon the free will. And it is not that we cannot, but we will not infringe upon those that do not desire. Those that are type 2 are not always negative beings. There are highly benevolent type 2 beings, ones that are in 98th and 99th percentile of benevolency. Those beings' only difference from ourselves are that they are willing to co-create in versions where they believe they are helping, even if they are not necessarily, in our own perspective, doing what the Earth Collective desires them or wants them to do. We look at your energy as a whole when we work with you. Those that are 98 and 99th percentile look at their energy and the Earth and what they believe the Earth needs. That is why their actions differ from ours. But you are still being given that assistance, and you are still being given the co-creation ability with your own guides, with your own extra-dimensional connections, and with type 1 beings who are willing to co-create in the personal and growth-inhibiting or growth-enhancing versions.
Okay, very good. So at the end of all these events, how did I end up on their ships? Where did they take me? And what did I saw? And what did I do?
Yes, first of all, after settling out of the war style, you had moved out of the area with your localized family, meaning only your wife and children. After moving out of the war area, out into the wilderness by yourself, you still felt that great desire to help. You would sit each evening at your campfire, at your tent and set, and meditate and try to connect to them more in a telepathic way. And because your attunement allowed that deeper version of connecting to that energy, it gave you the opportunity to connect to certain parts of that specific collective. Once you did, they saw that your own heart was becoming clear of hate and violence. They desired for their own version of teachings to be given out to other humans, but many of them did not care for the war itself. Those entities within that fraction that did not care for violence but enjoyed the idea of humans understanding the principles that they desired to share came to you. They worked with you out in the wilderness for multiple years. After your children moved on to their own and your wife had passed from illness, you asked, I have nothing left in my own life. What can I do to serve you? They then allowed a co-creation of your own self going into those ships and speaking to them, talking to them, co-creating with them, taking you out of your Earth collective physically and being able to co-create versions of interactions. What they taught you was a great deal. They gave you keys of understanding of their own race's structure. This means they allowed you to enter their version of the collective consciousness, just as those who connect to their own version of the archives or their own version of the higher flames of understanding. In that energy, you were able to take in a great deal of information. You then started going back into the Earth Collective and working with other humans across the entirety of the globe in the most peaceful of ways, places that were not yet inhabited by those that were in the extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional version of that war. By sharing and co-creating your desire of energy with these beings, it allowed them to grow. You saw great happiness in this, and due to the nature of your understanding, your clarity of emotion and clarity of soul, it enhanced the version of your life, where many of the beings had lived to be 100 to 200 years of age. In that point, you would live to be several hundred years of age.
What was that race that took me on their ship?
This was a race that was co-creating with the Krishna version of collective. These entities were Pleaidian in nature. They were humanoid fifth density Pleaidian constructs. Now you would call them the Planatalata.
Okay, very good. Going to our last portion of inquiry, Hindu text dating back thousands of years ago, and to be specific, I am referring to the Sanskrit epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, which, among others, give accounts of the Kurukshetra war and the battle between Rama and the demon Ravana. Both describe what it looks like an atomic bomb being set off in that region some 12,000 years ago. I will read you some verses from the ancient Hindu text, the Mahabharata, that says, Gerkha, flying a swift and powerful Vimana, herald a single projectile charged with the power of the universe. An incandescent column of smoke and flame, as bright as 10,000 suns, rose with all its splendor. It was an unknown weapon, an iron thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death, which reduced to ashes the entire race of the Vrishnis and the Andhakas, and so on. Furthermore, scientists have found radiation levels in the ancient Indian cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. So, did they drop an atomic bomb?
Yes, now we understand this is the closest relatable technology that humans have in this moment that would relate to something that would appear as this. But the projectile version of weapon that we had expressed previously, the one that entails the electromagnetic projectile ability with the plasma-encoded ball, this was the version of weapon that was utilized that appeared to most humans as what they understand now as the atomic bomb. this was utilized by several different fractions of those armies. Again, although extremely magnificent technology from most humans' perspective, this was in fact quite primitive of the races that were co-creating. But the weapons that could be procured on higher levels were those that were in 4th dynasty and 5th dynasty and would have no effect on the physical version of Earth.
What about the time? The scientists say that it goes back 12,000 years ago. Is this date correct, or is even more older than this?
Yes, and you are expressing what within 12,000 years previously?
When this bomb was dropped at the cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. They dated it back 12,000 years ago. Is this date correct or it's wrong? It dates,
Yes, it is approximately correct. This was towards the end version of that area, and it was approximately 11.5 thousand of your years previous, and that was towards that very end tail, after seeing great deals of destruction, after seeing wiping out of entire sub-races of both humans and extraterrestrials and extra-dimensional beings. That is what created the desire to end the confrontation, war, and co-creation with human beings upon such a physical level.
Well, it's a real shame that it lasted for so many thousands of years. We're not talking about hundreds of years, we're talking about thousands of years.
Yes, and of course many different versions of humans would have existed if that were not to take place, and many of the forms of humans that you understand today would not have existed. So it changed the history deeply and fundamentally, but the overall energy of the Earth Collective was the same. The reason why that war, in our own perspective, created that entire span of time that you look at in a linear fashion was because of the Earth's desire to go from a highly unbalanced to more balanced energy. And most humans within the Earth Collective, as well as the Earth Collective itself, desires sharp, large, and heavy versions of changes. This is why war breaks out so easily in this now moment, but also more so in that. And that spanning of thousands of years, that is how long it took the entirety of the Earth Collective to say, this is enough of war. We do not care what beings upon the other side of a river or on the other side of a mountain feel or think. We will take care of our own area. And that is where tribalism became even much more tightly knit. Back in that time of war, another race or another tribe of human beings would work with another if they were worshipping the same god or following the same constructs of energy, of beliefs. But that energy also would engage them to falsified versions of information. If you were to go several hundred miles in one direction, although one Krishna believer would follow another Krishna believer, the version of beliefs was so drastically different, there would even be inward fighting. So this allowed those that were in certain areas tribalistically to cut themselves off of other beings. One moment. Yes, and as we were saying, this would cause the version of those beings tribalistically to cut themselves off from others by allowing themselves to be isolated. It gave them their own ability to not have to worry about what the next country, neighbor, or tribe would worry or think about. After that was finally set within the majority of the human collective that were at war at that time, that is when the manifestation of the release of the war. Now, when you look at it in your third density perspective, you would say, yes, politics, ideas, extra-dimensionals, all of these things, manipulations of DNA, are the cause of the war. But when we look at the energy, we see human beings desiring great and drastic changes of their own environment and their ability, and they did not believe that they had the power to change it themselves. That is why they created and manifested a version of war that brought extra-dimensionals and extraterrestrials into their co-created collective. As a Type 1, when we look at the Earth Collective, we say that you are not ready for us physically to interact with you. It is because we see the entire collective's energy. But a Type 2 being will go in with their own perspective and beliefs and say, this group of humans is working and willing to work with our own selves, therefore we will co-create with him. This is the different version. We perceive cause and effect through manifestation, non-physical, emotional, and mental means, while most Type 2 see the very surface area and parts of the higher self areas.
Some would say, some experts would say that we are actually in the brink of a third world war, and if that would happen and there will be an exchange of nuclear heads or nuclear bombs, will the ETs intervene and stop this?
There are many different factions of those that are Type 2 and benevolent, extremely benevolent, in the 85 to 92% benevolency, that transmit their own desire to co-create zero nuclear effectiveness, meaning that if one being or one nation upon your Earth Collective were to shoot a nuclear missile at another country, they would prevent that from occurring. In Hiroshima and Nagasaki, in your history of World War II, those were significant versions of weapons, ones that had never occurred on your Earth Collective by human hands alone before. By that energy, the extraterrestrial beings that are watching over that energy now desire for this never to occur again, and those technologies of your nuclear weapons have enhanced so greatly from that time till this time that they will work on all possibilities. Now, they believe that they are able to stop all of those energies. In our perspective, only the Earth Collective would be able to manifest that energy. For instance, if one nation were to shoot a nuclear weapon, the extraterrestrial beings that are helping humanity would work on dismantling. And they believe that with their superior version of technology, that they would not be able to ever not be able to dismiss that bomb. But in our perspective, if the Earth Collective needs that great shift and believes that it only can occur with catastrophe, then no matter what they do to the bomb, they would not be able to dismantle that bomb. In our perspective also, we perceive the Earth Collective is not desiring that large scale of shift. Most human beings are starting to see the shift can occur within and does not need another great world war to enhance that energy. And all of you who shift into your own realities, to all of the probabilities that occur, if you stay within that belief system of not needing large things to make your shift, you can create in the version of reality that does not have a World War III or does not have nuclear warfare.
Well, again, I'm talking on behalf of, this time in the millions, we want to send our gratitude and our love to those races who are guardians of such an event and who are willing to intervene with our blessings and stop those nuclear bombs and destroying those nuclear bombs before they are being detonated and make a huge destruction of our planet. So we'd like to extend our gratitude and our love to them. So please, Aridif, transfer these feelings to them, and please tell them to continue to be our guardians, and we are very thankful for this.
Yes, of course, and many of those races are already aware of those who do know. You, before ever exchanging words with my own energy in this moment, with this specific engagement in the now moment, already knew that there were beings who were able to dismantle, and you had always felt great gratitude for those beings. They already felt that, and now that you express it in a larger collective way, they feel and receive that even more so. Your own gratitude is received, and love from them to you is also given back.
Very good. Aridif, thank you so much for this wisdom. Personally, I have heard today many things that I was not aware of, and I'm very pleased. Thank you so much, and we will talk again soon in the near future.
Yes, but of course, we are grateful to have co-created with you, and as we've expressed previously, you are loved.
Thank you, Aridif. You too.
Yes, of course. We bid you adieu for this evening.